to Beyond the Ring, a podcast that covers all things in the stock show industry from the informative to the insane, starring Ryan Rash.
Find out who you are and do it on purpose.
And Dale Hummel.
I'm Joe Biden, and I'm running for the U.S. Senate.
Now on with the show.
Welcome to Beyond the Ring. This is Dale Hummel, along with co-star Ryan Rash.
Hello, hello, hello.
Ryan, I think it's been a heavy week in terms of news and news cycles going crazy. Some of the biggest news in our industry would be the Fort Worth Stock Show. Would you like to address that one?
Well, unfortunately, the Fort Worth Stock Show has canceled for 2021. I don't know what other there is to address about it other than, that's a blow to the industry and very sad, but it's happened several times throughout the year 2020. And just like all the other cancellations, we're just going to have to pick up and move on.
Well, I think it hits people harder from the standpoint that if you would talk to many of those that I visit with or the families that we work with in Texas, thought that would maybe be the last one that would cancel because it's privately owned and conservative mayor and has a lot of positive going for him. So I think it maybe hit him a little bit harder doing so. And obviously the stock show, what people sometimes forget is that they do not want to cancel. They're there to put on a show, and just the financial aspect alone is going to hit them, I'm sure, pretty hard by not having the show. So we need to keep that in mind, that the stock show's assumably doing everything or tried to do everything possible to host one. And sometimes it's not going to work. And we sure hope the others are able to continue, and we continue to have plenty of shows to go to. But I know there's plenty of shows popping up in terms of larger jackpot shows and even replacement shows for Denver. And there's shows that will be happening. It just may not be as traditional as what we're used to in the past.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a terrible blow, and I know that there are literally thousands of kids across Texas that are greatly disappointed, and I empathize with that. I feel that, and I posted on Facebook about it, and I get it, and I understand it. Again, this is something that the realization that we have had to face entirely too many times over the past year, but it's also probably not going to be the last time. And again, until there are proven therapeutics and a vaccine or multiple vaccines on the market, and these liability issues of having large events of any, not just a livestock show, of any size, form, or fashion, it is going to come down to whether those events are willing to accept that liability and that public health risk, because there are risks involved. And you know me, I am not someone who has altered the way I live my life. I have probably traveled more than anybody else that I know during this Rona nonsense, but I also see the flip side of it. I understand the points that they make and where they're coming from. No, none of us have to agree with it, but we do have to at least try to see their standpoint on it. And once again, we have rallied and things have continued to move on and progress. Not the norm, but things have still continued, and they're going to continue.
Agreed. And I think that's the positive side to look at. And I guess in the liability issue, and that's a hard one to wrap your head around, because I think each show is putting up statements that you're releasing your liability. The only thing I can think of is maybe the rodeo associations and the equestrian laws, where most equestrian training and lessons and things like that, they waive liability for injury. It would be nice if we would see some legislation come down. And again, I'm not big government. Less is better. But under a situation like this, when it's so difficult to prove where you're going to pick up COVID, where you may have contracted it, that it's just about impossible, it would be nice to see some legislation, and maybe it's already in place in some states, that they remove that liability and let those that are attend at their own risk. And that would certainly ease it up dramatically for somebody like the Fort Worth Stock Show or any of the shows that we're dealing with, or other large events. And all of a sudden taking that liability aspect off the table, I think would make a huge difference. What's going on in the political world? It's been quite eventful.
Well, your brother that you supported for a week, Joe Biden, he is back out on the campaign trail. Yesterday, he forgot what state he was in. He also did not know Mitt Romney's name. He called him that Mormon governor. He also,
which is accurate.
Well, actually, he's a senator now. But okay,
Yes.
we'll go with that technicality, I guess. Since you want to,
He got across who he was talking about. He got the message across somehow.
You and your liberal tendencies once again showing up. But go right ahead. Excuse me. He also today decided that Trump was running for his third term in office because he announced to people at one of his press briefings that if he won Ohio, the presidential election was over, and that Trump had won Ohio and Florida his last two elections. So according to Joe, this is going to be President Trump's third time to run for office.
That is not a good sign. And I don't know if the mainstream media is not reporting any of this, but if you follow it at all, you're going to see Joe gaffe, and he's going to gaffe some more. And I believe, maybe you mentioned it, did he also not announce he was running for Senate?
Oh, that was 2 times yesterday, but he's done that a lot. I mean, he's continually confused on whether he's running for president or Senate. Now, see, where I will forgive him on this is he has run for Senate and president a whole lot of times. So, maybe because he's run for president 3 times and Senate, I don't know, like 96, maybe it is hard to distinguish, but there you go.
No. And I think that the sad part for me is there's a large number of Americans that have lost their minds. I cannot accept that an intelligent individual can embrace any form of socialism that Joe is representing with his running mate, Kamala. We have witnessed other countries embrace socialism and fail, but now seems like a great plan. How is this younger generation and those embedded in the swamp convinced that socialism is the direction to go? I'm thoroughly confused.
I don't think that the Trump campaign or Republicans in general have done a really bang up job of drawing that distinction from the Biden-Bernie manifest to socialism. I think they could have done a lot better job on that. Again, I do not think that the majority of Americans probably have a full and comprehensive understanding of what socialism is another problem. We hear that term put out there. I'm sure every American knows of countries that have adopted socialism, etc., but I don't think they have a real hard grasp on how socialism affects any country, much less a country that has had the principles and beliefs of the United States of America to go any way or tilt in that direction in any form will be devastating.
I agree. And I think the Republicans have not defined it as well as they should have. And I don't know if you can, because I don't know if the rest of the crowd out there is listening. And you're absolutely correct that I don't think they completely understand socialism, because they tie it to things. Let's say you're a college student with college loans. They're going to tie socialism to free college, and not only free college, but you're going to have your college loan forgiven. So you have people that have never been to college. Why should they pay for the debt of college students who took out huge loans to get their degrees? So those that didn't attend college all of a sudden are covering just as much of the tax burden as those that went to college and took out these massive loans. It just doesn't make any sense. But does it appeal to those in college now and those with college loans? Yeah, socialism sounds great.
And you're right. Like, those parts of it sound peachy keen, but you also don't realize that somebody has to pay for it. And eventually it is going to be this country that has to pay for those things. And it will happen through ways that they will not be real happy about when they get that bill.
No, I think, and when if we take ourselves a decade down the road and they look back on these things, I think they're going to have a very, very rude awakening. And it's concerning to me when we think about, our immigration policy in the past. We need skilled labor to come into this country, and it's been something that's happened for 100 plus years. So we have many people with valued skills from other countries who want to immigrate to the U.S., but must go through a rigorous vetting process. But you've got the criminal sect gang members coming up possibly from Mexico. They jump the southern fence and they're perfectly welcome. We should allow them to be citizens just because they decide to jump into our country. I'm thoroughly confused with all of those things. $5 billion is too much for border security, yet we spend $1.5 trillion for free healthcare for these people that came into the country illegally. And again, if I'm in Mexico or Central or South America, a lot of those countries, I'd want to get out of those countries. A lot of times we're looking at socialism or communism, and a lot of those people want to flee towards capitalism. And I respect that and I understand that, but it's simply not something we can take on without some form of vetting and some form of regulation in terms of we need to know who these people are and go through the process. I'm great with all of it, but the way that the left is framing out how they want to open these borders completely, it's physically not possible. It does not work in any manner.
It's going to be interesting. You listen to the mainstream media and all these people that are forecasting all these different outcomes on the election. As I did in 2016, I look at things a little differently. All the polls in 2016 said Hillary was going to win, that there was no chance for Trump to have a victory. Again, even in what we are calling a pandemic, which I'll get to that in a minute, but the number of people that have shown up this week at Trump rallies is probably more impressive now than it was then, because there is a segment of the population that is scared that they'll contract the virus and, all this other stuff that's associated with COVID-19. The rallies are bigger. The crowds are more enthusiastic. On the flip side of it, there is no one attending the events that Joe Biden has been having this week. There is no enthusiasm. If you look at the social media presence alone, I put something on my Facebook yesterday. Joe Biden had a rally in Toledo, Ohio, and 6 hours later, in terms of that rally's video being on his Facebook, 6 hours of it being on there, in 32 minutes, Trump's rally had doubled the number of likes, tripled the number of comments, and I think it was like in 32 minutes, he had like over 20,000 shares on that post. And in 6 hours, Joe Biden barely had 5,000 shares of that post. Now, that says something. Again, I went to vote this morning in Texas. I have never seen that many people lined up to vote early in my town or county ever before. I put a post up of that about Facebook, and every comment I got, it was the same, that there were more people voting here, here, and here, and they listed off. Somebody posted that a friend of hers in Georgia waited in line 6 hours yesterday to vote. So my point of all this is they say that the election is going to be decided in the Supreme Court, or they say, all these other things. I do think it is going to be record turnout, no matter what way you want to slice it, whether it was mail-in votes, early votes, or however. And if you do listen to some of the mainstream media, they will tell you that so far there have been more votes cast than in any other election year up to this point. So I do believe that there is going to be a winner, and it is not going to be decided by a court.
No, I agree. And I think I can explain. I see it very clearly. The base and those showing up for Trump rallies, I think they're more supportive, more excited, more geared up to get the vote out and them themselves get out and vote than it ever has. I do believe it's still a referendum against Trump. I don't think there's any enthusiasm for Sleepy Joe. Consequently, you're not seeing people show up for his rallies. But my fear is, even though they're not showing up for the rallies, they're going to go out and vote against Trump. So to me, the consequences are huge that every conservative person out there has to get out and vote. We can't allow one person to sit at home. We have to count on that enthusiasm for the conservative side to make sure that we're at 90+% of those people get to vote, and preferably 100%, because the consequences of this upcoming election could result in irreversible power for the far left. Think about the impact of stacking the Supreme Court and the Senate. Think about the handouts that will buy 50% of the populist vote next election, 2024. How do you suggest the silent conservative person will ever again have a voice in our government? I want you to do more than go out and vote. I want the conservative population to speak your ass up. I want you to get as many other like-minded people to the polls, make sure they vote. I don't care what state you're in. If you think it can't be done, you still need to go vote. The consequences run deeper than most will ever accept or understand. Do not wait until it's too late. I can't emphasize it enough that this frightens me. And the only thing we can do at this point is get out there and vote, get as many people to vote. If you've been very silent but have very strong opinions and you're afraid of voicing them, I suggest right now you might want to voice them just a little bit, because unfortunately it's those that have the loudest voice on the other side that are being heard.
Well, I have never had a problem voicing my opinion about anything. So obviously you're not lecturing to me.
No, I'm not lecturing to you. That would be very accurate. So I'm concerned about it. I hope everybody takes it serious. And it sounds like, from what you're talking about, Ryan, at the polls today at your place and the others that comment on Facebook, I think that I cannot imagine how that conservative voter isn't showing up to vote this year. I don't know how they could not. So I'm hopeful that type of turnout is maybe going to put him over the top.
Again, I'm not forecasting who's going to win or anything like that, but I do think that the mainstream media is really doing the American public a disservice by putting out the thought process that this election will be decided in the courts, because when they themselves report that there's been record numbers of votes cast already, then I don't see how they can grasp that conclusion when also they're putting out that Joe Biden's ahead in the polls 14%. So none of it makes any sense. But then again, mainstream media doesn't make any sense a lot of the time. But that's enough of that. I know that you haven't been paying attention, but I have been paying attention to the Amy Coney Barrett Senate confirmation hearings today, and that have been this week. And for those of you that don't know exactly how this process is going to work, Monday, they began the introductions. Tuesday and Wednesday are the questioning. Thursday, there will be basically a whole bunch of nothing happen other than that they will vote to hold over for a week, which is the standard process. Next Thursday, that committee will come in. I'm assuming they will vote 12-10 to confirm her and send that report to the Senate. After that, it is up to Leader McConnell to decide on when the full Senate votes. But the thought process and what has been laid out is that the up and down vote on whether Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed to the Supreme Court will happen the Tuesday before the election. I did watch her today throughout the entire hearing. She is beyond impressive. She sat there at that table for over 9 hours and took questions from 12 senators in 30-minute increments. She did not bring in one piece of paper, one notebook, not one material for her to reference at all. And she was by far the smartest person in the room.
I did not get to watch much of it. We're preparing to load up and head to Kansas City in the morning. So I only caught a little bit of it, but the few times that I was in the house and had that on in the background, I was overwhelmed with her ability to answer questions in a manner that you would expect from a Supreme Court justice. I don't know how anybody can deny her qualifications, intelligence, or ability, and I don't believe that they're attacking that. They're simply trying to attack political preferences and personal preferences that she made very clear do not come into play. She's going to follow the Constitution and interpret the Constitution as she always has.
Well, some of them didn't ask any questions at all. And now I will say that there were more Democrats that made this a political campaign ad than Republicans, but Republicans did some too. But there was the senator from Rhode Island did not ask her one question whatsoever at all. Several of the senators, Democratic senators, lectured and went on about Roe versus Wade and the Affordable Care Act and election, that the Supreme Courts were going to decide the election, all this, and might ask her a question or two at the end. Lindsey Graham is the chairman of this committee. He was very strong, even though he was doing a little bit of political campaigning at the beginning. He did ask her some questions. I thoroughly enjoyed Ted Cruz, not because I thought he did a great job, but he did a whole lot of promoting his new book, One Vote Away. And then at the end, I guess to fill his time, he asked her some really odd questions. And the first one was, does she speak any other foreign languages? And she said that at one time she was pretty fluent in French, but that was a long time ago. And then he asked her if she played any musical instruments, and she explained the piano. And I don't know, it was just weird. But that's Ted Cruz for you.
Do you assume he just filling time, or just
I guess
that odd?
I don't know. It was super weird. I'm not gonna lie. It was really really odd. But Ted Cruz is odd.
I've been more impressed with him here this past 6 months than I ever have, though.
Well, I'm not going to say that, but he's still an odd duck.
Very much so. Anything else on the current events, or should we move into the topic?
Yeah, we can move into your topic, sure.
Should market animals look the same as breeding animals? Steers the same as heifers? Barrows the same as breeding gilts? Wether sheep the same as frame sheep? Wether goats the same as full-bloods? In general, they are two separate worlds in the show ring as a result of selecting different types. I don't know where we can break them down by species and kind of go through that a little bit and determine where do we draw the line. Do we want to separate them? Do we want to keep them the same? Well, let's throw sheep in there to begin with. And I guess it's the easiest one to look at from the standpoint that as we have Louisville coming up here, the biggest frame sheep show in the world, there is no question that the frame sheep have detached completely from the real world and allow the circus animal to become the guiding factor. There is no way that a frame sheep can ever be used to make a competitive show wether in 90% of the sheep breeds out there. So there's clearly a separation in that situation. But if you narrow it down and talk about, okay, here's a wether dam class versus a market lamb class, then we're a whole lot similar. Thoughts, Ryan, on the sheep, breeding versus market?
Well, I think that a whole bunch of listeners that aren't sheep people won't understand what you mean by frame sheep and don't know that terminology. So I guess to explain that better is we're talking about breeding sheep in the various and different breeds and, that they're categorized in. But I don't think I know a lot of people that when I have used that term, they're like, not sheep people, but other species people don't know what that is. So that's just a little clarification there. Again, in general on this, we're not going to agree, and that's fine because I like disagreeing with you, and I know the viewers like it when I disagree with you. So I'm here for you this week. I do think that in the sheep world, it is the biggest disconnect between the two. Obviously, there's breeding sheep. A lot of those breeding sheep are still being judged to some extent on terms of their wool quality and their wool character. And that has nothing to do in terms of a market animal, but that is still factored in to some extent when sorting those animals.
Now, time out. That's in our wool breeds, not the meat breeds. Wool breeds.
You were talking about all breeding sheep, sir.
True. So we can factor that in.
No. Back up. You were talking about breeding sheep. That's what you said. Breeding versus
correct. But there's no question that wool sheep are judged on fleece quality.
Is that not a breeding sheep, sir?
It is a breeding sheep.
Okay, so what's your problem?
It is a breeding sheep. I don't see the relevance in I guess there's big enough differences that we can look at. Let's narrow it down to let's just go to the Hampshire breed or the Suffolk breed that's heavily influencing the weather lamb industry. And even there, and they've tried to moderate a little bit, I think, in the breeding sheep world and bring them back to reality a little bit. But it's amazing to me the past probably 5 or 6 years. I walk through the stalls at Louisville in the breeding sheep or frame sheep area, and it just overwhelms me, even though I was just there the previous year, just how big we've made these. And I can appreciate maybe we're trying to put more growth in them and maybe trying to increase carcass weights and do some things like that. But there's such a strong selection for so many years simply to make them taller that it's really taken its toll, I guess, in terms of quality and muscle and structural correctness and a lot of other things. Just like everything else, Ryan, when we single trait select, it really goes the wrong way. And I think, as Ryan alluded to, there's a big separation in the sheep side and outside of looking at the weather dams. And Ryan, I would like your opinion, because if I'm sorting a weather dam show, I probably sort those just as I would breed them in terms of which weather dams I feel comfortable are going to have the best chance of producing that high-end show weather. And maybe I'm in the oddity that I take it too close to that, but I'm not sorting them much different than what I would a market lamb show.
Are you done? Do I get to speak now?
Please.
Oh, okay. Because I just want to bring up the fact that I was actually agreeing with you on the breeding sheep show, and I was bringing up a valid point, and yet you wanted to disagree just to disagree and then took over. But that's fine. Anyway, moving on to your point on weather dams. Yes, I do think that you judge weather dams and market weathers fairly similarly, just like you would in terms of judging market does and weather does and the goat thing. I do think that there are some subtle differences in terms of the fact that I still think that weather dams need to appear feminine about their head, neck, and shoulders. That would probably be the biggest difference in the two to me. I think the same principles of muscularity, structural integrity, and show ring appeal are the same in both.
I would agree. And I would probably say that there's a large portion of the people sorting the shows that may try to put more structural integrity into the weather dams versus the market weather. Ryan, obviously you've stated many times you're going to be a fanatic on structural soundness on both. So I don't think it probably changes much on your side, nor does it change a lot on my side. But in general, some will lean that direction and give the market animal excuse for the fact that they're a terminal animal. They don't have to be around that long. They don't have to be as good on their feet and legs. But at this point, I think we've made such incredible body type in these sheep. I mean, it's hard for me to even fathom that if you told me 10 years ago we can get to where we are today, or 20 years ago, I can't even imagine the market lamb shows. And again, I'm not going to a lot of them, but I'll hit the major shows in Texas and then some of them up here. They're so good, and that body type is so amazing in terms of their rack, their loin, their hip. All of those things are so good that, to me, the only thing that I shouldn't say the only thing, the easiest thing for me to sort them on becomes structural correctness, because that seems to be the area with the most differences, where they're all hitting that window in terms of just massive muscle, great handle within general. I know there's some differences, but your top end is just incredible in terms of that body type. And it's interesting to me how much progress they've made, but sometimes we do lose sight of feet and legs, and maybe if there's a place they could improve. And I think Ryan and I will probably hit it in every species that we always want to see them better built.
I do think sheep, especially market sheep, have come a long, long way in a few years in terms of changing the type and kind and making them more incredible in terms of their body build. Obviously, they are really, really muscular, shapely animals now. And so, again, when you brought this topic up, the biggest thing that I am going to disagree with most people about is that a lot of philosophy still relates to the fact that they think that you should sort breeding animals for structural integrity and soundness more than you should market animals, because there is still a train of thought out there. Now, it is greatly diminished than it used to be, that a market animal at its end only has to walk to the kill floor, and that's as sound as it has to be. And I will riot and loot and go crazy when people bring that up to me.
I think it was easier before to talk about that because there was maybe I'm wrong and just living in the present more than I should be. But I think in the past we haven't had them, their body build and all the other things haven't gotten to the point where they are now. Where to me, you have so many good things built in that it seems like structural soundness is the logical place to sort them. And in the past, I think that commercial base or background, when we talked about these are terminal animals, we can accept a little issue there here or there. Well, I think we're getting to the point now. Well, it's the logical place to sort them from, but we can keep going through the species, and I'm sure that will continue to pop up. And I'm going to give you my background on the goat side. And for those of you that are unaware, my background is relatively short, 10-ish years or so, but I have visited with plenty of the old school breeders, and I really enjoy some of the history of the boar goats. But when the full bloods came into this country, it appeared as though they had some commercial practicality. They were everything the show ring didn't like. They were loose hided, loose structured, just deep enough in their hip to be a little more practical, very maternal, have some growth abilities. This was not attractive, nor was it something that was going to appeal in our show ring by any means. So immediately, from what I can tell, we started to select for what we prefer in the show ring, and that's a more appealing look. The full-blood goats today look very much different from the original imports, and yet still equally as far away from maybe what's winning in the market goat arena. So the original ones that came in, not where we are in the market goat arena. The full-blood breeding does, I'm not going to say they're as far apart as we see in the sheep, but it's very, very close. We've got some pretty big goats out there that these full-bloods in general have selected for height and size. They've allowed them to get a bit fat to put enough thickness into them. We peel that fat off, they get a little narrower. In general, I'm not saying there aren't really good ones out there, and I appreciate the good ones, but in general, we have these full-bloods going one direction where the weather ring is definitely gone the other direction. And I think, Ryan, in this you'll enjoy, that the weather goat show ring is the epitome of what you consider that circus show or that circus animal. And I happen to agree with it. I love it.
Yeah, and so it's fine in the stuff you raise, but everybody else needs to be more commercially driven and it needs to relate more to the industry. So that's a good deal.
No, I'm
glad you're not a hypocrite or anything.
No, I admitted hypocrisy. I am going to be the first one, and I always have been very open with it. The market goats that we're producing to try to win national shows, we try to make these things really tight and thin-hided. We try to make them well-built, attractive, muscular, big old legs on them. It's a challenge, and I love the process of the pursuit. This has nothing to do with any real-world production, but I still fully embrace it, and I love it. And I'm not trying to tell others in other species how to raise animals. I'm just giving my opinion that because of tradition, and I hadn't had any attachment to the goat ring whatsoever, and I don't see them maybe as a mainstream production item, even though there seems to be a shortage of goat meat in the U.S. all the time. I see them as a show animal, not a production animal. Complete admitted hypocrisy. Not going to hide that. Open about it. Doesn't maybe make any sense at all, but it is what it is.
We're glad that we cleared that up. Little trivia here. My family actually got into the boar goat craze when it first hit America. We had something called the East Texas Boar Goat Connection. So I do know, I have a great knowledge of what those creatures look like when they came over here.
You were not impressed, I assume.
No, I was not impressed. In fact, what I was going to say was what I thought the goat's greatest attribute to our livestock program is it greatly reduced the ringworm in my show cattle. And so that was kind of what I thought of our boar goat stint there. But you are right. They don't look, I don't even think they really resemble the full bloods now to a lot of extent. I do think that you are dead on about more than any other species, probably the market goat industry, and that goes to the weather and doe side. They probably are the most circus freak-ish of any of the species, and I'm all for that. And that's why I enjoy judging goats to a great deal. And so I do think that they resemble the ones that are winning these shows and are what is considered elite in the show ring right now are the farthest away from anything commercial of any of the species. And so again, I just find this so interesting that you, who wants to browbeat me with the commercial Bible in the hog industry and the cattle industry, will admit what a hypocrite you are and that you raise these circus animals. So, but you know, you have to sleep with yourself at night, Dale. I don't. So there you go.
No, and the only ounce of justification that I can put to it is I do disconnect goats from real production in the U.S. I guess maybe the best example when we're doing our COVID stimulus for different livestock producers, guess what was not included? What species? I could not get any free money for having my goats. And I have a lot of them, but if I would have had cattle, sheep, or hogs, they were willing to hand out X amount per head, but not for goats. So I detach them from the real world. And again, this is not an excuse. It's not an explanation, but in my crazy mind, that's part of it. And the fact that you remember, and Ryan just talked about it, that how those came over, what they look like, we have changed them so much. It's so unique to me that we can manipulate what these things look like to the degree we have in the goat world in a relatively short period of time. From what I would say when they came in to the United States, they were very much, I'm going to say, selected strictly for commercial basis, not show ring whatsoever. But here's goats that grew, performed, survived in various climates and did well. And that's what they were selected for. And consequently, they looked like a commercial animal. And we've taken them so far to this circus animal look and unique and out there that it's exciting for me to try to continue to push that envelope and make them even more unique yet. And the goal originally was, let's try to make them look a little more like sheep because they were ahead of the game. And they still are. They're still way more massive topped and they're bigger hip, but the top end goats all of a sudden could maybe drift just over into that sheep ring and not look quite as out of place as they used to.
I agree with a lot of your sentiment. I don't think they look like sheep. But
I think just the general outline going that direction. Not that they look like sheep, but maybe I should rephrase it. Try to make them look like quality livestock.
You're going to say I'm crazy, and so are the viewers, and that's fine because I'm well aware that I am not sane. I think the really, really elite goats resemble more, if you break them into their parts, they resemble more in terms of cattle than they do sheep.
No, I'm good with that. I can go across the board. I can even see some we can go across species, and the really good ones, I think, of any species have a similar, to me. And maybe I'm as delusional as you, Ryan, but I can see the same where that neck ties in. There's so many things that I can see similar in what I consider to be those real unique animals across species. It's been a long time coming to get the goats to that level.
There's no doubt on that. Like I said, we had boar goats when they first came in. I can remember the first time or the first year that Texas was starting to have jackpot goat shows, and we were in Austin, Texas, the Belt Buckle Bonanza, and I may have told this story on here before already. I don't know, but we were having the first ever goat show at the Belt Buckle. Lady drove up in a paper plate, decked out black Cadillac 4-door, and she pulled up to the stalling office and she said, "I need to know where I'll stall my goat." And we said, "Well, when you come back with your trailer and your goat, go down this hill and over here." And we explained it to her. And she said, "I'm not coming back. I've got it with me." And he was in the back seat.
That doesn't surprise me. I have not, to my knowledge, heard that story. That's a good one. I'm good with that. No, and there's plenty of that, and they partially because they'll fit. So I guess it works. But no, it's been. I enjoy the unique challenge to try to make the goats look like what Ryan would term a circus animal, and just unique and out there and quality and ring presence. And I think as we move into the future, the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to continue to see a few more of those really elite ones, and that's pretty exciting. But let's move on to cattle. And I think, Ryan, you will enjoy this one because it's easier to defend. And I may agree with you a little more than I would like. But do you need to select your steers different than your heifers?
Again, I'm going to go back to the same thing that I kind of said when we were talking about market wethers compared to weather dams in the sheep belt. Other than the fact that I think that they need to read with a female or feminine quality about their head and neck, and obviously they need to look like they are able to be fertile and reproductive, then I really just don't think there's that much difference.
So we're trying to assess physical attributes to fertility and reproduction.
Not saying that you can't, but I'm definitely saying that if I would fight you to the end if you go through what is considered, a lot of times they have what they call a market heifer show.
Correct.
I would say that the majority of those cattle that end up in those type of divisions, those animals were bred to be steers, not bulls, not breeding heifers. They were bred to be steers. They came out as a heifer, and that's why the market heifer division came up. And I would fight you on the fact that if you looked at the majority of them and then looked at a class of breeding heifers of any breed, that you would not say that the majority of those breeding heifers appeared to be more feminine and reproductive.
By the definition assigned to femininity, a long face, long neck, those more refined features up to the front end, I agree, but better teats, larger vulva, outside of the
Are
vulva.
Are those not physical characteristics that you can determine with your eye?
I think that there's obviously a sort line there between infantile vulva and functional, but when we get up into talking about the front end, I don't see I don't know that there's not, and I don't know how you could do it because it's so subjective, but I'm pretty confident that there's not a correlation to mothering ability and fertility. And the dairy people might argue against it because they really talk about it in the show ring. So I could be way off base, but I think you look at the vulva size or teat placement, all those things come into play, obviously, on the maternal side. I have always had a difficult time and I understand, and I'll even talk about it. And I want my heifers to be what we call feminine up through their front end. I just don't know if our definition of femininity really applies to maternal abilities or fertility, maybe more so. I think they probably apply to a certain degree that, like Ryan talked about, those market heifers, there's no question when they made that mating, they were trying to make a steer and they made a heifer. So it works great to have that class as kind of an outlet for byproduct, maybe is what we call it. I'm sure they're going to put some of them back into the herd to raise more club calves, but I think there's a lot of things that we can look at, and I still have a hard time, and maybe I'm not as in tune with it as I need to and out there watching those shows. But if I were to attend the Hereford Junior National or the Angus Junior National, those females that are winning there, I would have a hard time believing that they're going to raise a real competitive market steer because maybe they've taken it further to that female look that we're talking about. Where I think a mother of a really good market steer is probably going to look a little more like a market steer, kind of like those that are in that market heifer class. I'm not saying it's impossible, but generally speaking, those would have a more difficult time making a steer and consequently aren't used for such, but obviously making more show heifers. And I think it's really evolved in that there's a huge market out there for these junior show heifers. And consequently, a lot of what we call our breeding cattle operation operations, that is the show operations. That's their goal, to raise these really high end junior heifers, and it works, and it's a great industry. And I think we've really gone that direction and have nothing against that. But I have a hard time thinking that same one is going to raise that elite steer. Obviously within their breeds, they're going to raise some that are more competitive.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go back to this point that you're talking about, that you can't physically determine if one looks feminine or reproductive. I'll tell you how we're going to solve this argument real quick. So the next time that we are at a large event that has a drag show, I'm going to take you to a drag show. And if you can go to one of those and not tell me that as much goes into being a drag queen and as attractive and good looking as they are, if you can't tell me that a real pageant queen is not more feminine than a drag queen, then I'll tell you.
No, and I
then my point is making. Move on. Next.
No, I think I've confused the issue. I agree on seeing the differences in femininity and talking about it and liking that look. I just don't know that it relates to fertility. I'm
You're just scared to go to a
with
drag show. We get it, Del. We understand.
I think that would be entertaining, actually. I do believe that. Okay, so within the cattle and there's so many things that we do select correct are the similar between the market steers and the show heifers in terms of build and structural correctness. And we've kind of already talked about that there's a complement to the breeders across species, and on the heifer side of things or the steer side of things, it kind of goes back to what we talked about. They've done such a good job breeding cattle that are body type is so unique and gone the right direction, and some of the things that we want to select for, that I think maybe we haven't made as much progress in terms of structural correctness on feet and legs, because we don't all agree. It's so subjective that if you have a panel of 4 judges, they may all 4 see the structural differences independently and not always the same. So consequently, it's harder for something to take that path. It's not as definitive as muscle or length of body or length of neck or even femininity up through the front end, that I think there's more subjectivity and more differing opinions on structural soundness.
Finally, something that we absolutely agree on. I do think that structural soundness in all species is probably the most subjective trait that is measured or accountable in the show ring. And I also, not only do I think it's the most subjective, and I also think that there's different standards of what everyone that is out there, man, woman, child in a judging contest, etc., considers sound. A lot of that depends on their background, their upbringing, what they have been. Everything in life is a result of genetics and environment. And so your genetics and your environment and what you've been brought up around is going to shape that opinion a great deal. Again, I tell people all the time that one of the reasons that I am so strict on structural integrity and very, very critical on it is a lot of these people do not know I was extremely successful in market steer shows throughout the country. Also, at that time, all we cared about was those cattle being as muscular as we could make them with a cool look, and we did not give 2 hoots in hell about structure. And so I had to show those structural flaws out of all of those animals to the best of my ability. And a lot of times, I'll just be honest with you, it sucked. And so that personal experience that I had as a junior exhibitor, that has shaped my opinions and why I am so strict in terms of structural integrity and correctness when I judge. Like we talked about last week on the judging team episode, while I think that a lot of people can be out there and say, this one right here is not as sound as we want him, her, it to be. I think if you took 12 people, put them in 12 different rooms and asked them to describe why animal X was not as sound as we want him to be, I doubt you would get the same result twice in terms of listening to their description.
No, and I think that plays into just what we both talked about. I think because of that, maybe that's the area that we're selecting more and more on because there's so much variation in it, obviously because of different opinions and not everybody going exactly the same direction to get the same end goal. But it's interesting. And you brought up one other thing earlier, and it ties to this. I think there was a time that there was definitely the majority of the judges, kind of like what Ryan's talking about here, especially in the steer ring, that would accept some of these structural flaws and maybe use the excuse or the reasoning, not even an excuse, that they're terminal animals. They don't have to be around as long. But I think there was a time that the majority of the judges out there would accept structural flaws in a market animal more so than a breeding animal. And I think that has lessened, as Ryan brought up. I don't know if we're seeing that as much today.
I agree with you. It's gotten better. I still think there is a little bit of a double standard there. And I do think that in all species, and I'm going to call a spade, I think it's worse right now in pigs than anything else, which I know we have not moved on to them yet. But I do think that more than what I consider ideal, but I think more than a lot of people want to allude to, even though if it may not be brought out in terms of reasons and a microphone at a show, I do think that there is a lot more lenience on what we deem market animals in terms of structural correctness than there are breeding animals.
Agreed. And I think we should move into the pigs because, wow, there's some we're going to end up talking about structure. I can assure you heavily in this one. But today, and again, I'm not following the hog world every single day, and I'm not living it. I'm not in the trenches. But as I observe from the outside, and I enjoy judging a few pig shows, they're probably closer maybe now than they ever been in history in terms of gilts versus barrows or breeding gilts versus barrows. And I think I can justify it a little more from the standpoint that most of our purebred hog breeds and even our junior show gilts, their function is to obviously either raise another junior show gilt and or raise that really high end purebred barrow or eventually work into some type of barrow operation. But the market animal and the junior gilt show ring seem to be a little closer. They're not identical by any means, but there used to be a monster separation. We used to go to these breeding hog shows, these open shows or type conferences, and then we go to a little market hog show, and it was night and day. Where to me they're homogenizing a little bit because all the dollars are coming through the junior program, and there seems to be that on the local level, particularly just a huge market on the barrow side of it. Not saying there's not a lot of a market for junior gilts to go to the spectacular and some of those things, but in my mind, they're probably closer than they ever have been. The difference I see again is we're probably putting a little more emphasis on soundness on the female side. However, when I go to a market show or a barrow show, and I'm sure Ryan's going to tune in and maybe even take it further, I'm going to sort them on soundness and ability to move probably as quick as I sort them on anything.
Now, well, I agree with you completely that of all the species, that their market and breeding animals are the closest to similar. I absolutely, positively concur with that, and your rationale and reasonings behind that, I think they're spot on. I think there is a bigger disconnect in the fact that I think that the breeding gilts are criticized more in terms of soundness, far more than they are the market hogs, whether it's market gilts or market barrows. And it just seems so strange to me because the two look the most similar of all the species, but I think that structural correctness is judged way differently within that species than any other.
And I think it's just where the judges are at the moment. I'm not saying it'll stay that way, but I do agree that they're putting more emphasis and some of these barrows that are out there, they're so good in so many areas, but they just can't get going out of that hind leg like you or I'd like and flex that hock, maybe compensate in their pastern to accommodate for that straight hock. That when they're so good in so many areas, a lot of the judges are just letting that slide and just go with it. And maybe that's right. That's their opinion. That's fine. Maybe that's the trend. I don't know. but I understand what they're doing. And I guess if they come out and talk about this as a terminal animal and it's going to get to that marketable weight or already has, maybe that's the justification for it. But I am very biased towards wanting animals to look good on the move, get out and actually flex and go, and just a personal preference.
Every person that steps in the ring has their own opinion, and as long as you are accurate and honest in your assortment, that's all that matters. I take issue with this probably more than most people because I do love judging hogs. It is my favorite species to sort because of the vast structural differences in them, and that is what I like to read, and that is more fun to me than any other, breaking those differences down, describing them. But I can't tell you the number of times that I have said somebody come up to me and say, well, you're a great breeding gilt judge, but you're not as good a market hog judge. And that just illustrates my point. They want their breeding gilts to be sound and they focus on that more. But then the market animals, it's not nearly as big a factor. But yet, if you just leave those animals standing still a great deal of time, or even in motion, if it's a gilt out there, a lot of times you wouldn't know if that was a breeding gilt or a market gilt unless you knew exactly what was going on and what was being judged. If you walked up to a class of all gilts, a lot of times you would not know if that was a breeding gilt class or a market gilt class, but yet the structural integrity is focused a lot more on the breeding side.
I would agree with that completely. That's interesting. And I think when I threw the topic at Ryan, he was not very receptive to it. So I appreciate you diving into these. And I think there are some differences, and it's just human nature that we're going to select different types, and the people they're hiring to judge breeding sheep shows are going to be different than a lot of times different people hired to judge a market lamb show. And some can judge both and completely take them different directions. And there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody's going to have their own priorities, but it's interesting how things have evolved, and it'd be interesting to see the next 10 or 20 years what direction everything takes. There was one thing that I did want to ask Ryan, and you and I have not discussed this, and is why I want to bring it up. And I guess I have an opinion on it, but I'm very open to listen to other opinions. Let's use cattle for an example. The Hereford breed, the Angus breed, the Chiania breed, whatever breeds we put together, it seems as though, and maybe I'm wrong, with the exception of, let's say, that the American breeds, that a lot of these are starting to look more and more like one. Does that make sense? We don't have maybe those stereotypical breed standards that we used to possibly select for, where we're just trying to select for good cattle. Is that happening, or is that in my mind?
Are you saying that, like, if you just didn't look at hide color, etc., that you would think that the body conformation and style of all the breeds are becoming more similar?
At least the very top end, the ones that we're going out there and selecting. Yes, that is my point.
Yeah, I do think that to some extent that definitely has happened. And I think in a lot of ways that, again, because it is so competitive and these breeders and brokers and everybody involved in this industry are so competitive, and everything has gotten to such a high level of expertise that, yes, they are more similar, that it is a lot different than it was even, I would say, even 10 years ago, where there was definitely a different body type or style for what a British derivative breed in the cattle was compared to a continental or exotic influence is. I'm also going to say, and why that is good in a lot of ways, I'm going to say that a little bit, probably we have lost some emphasis on individual breeds' character, and that is something that I don't like to see.
And I think that goes back to, you're almost touching a little bit on what I wanted to bring up. There's going to be plenty of the more traditional breeders that would look at this as these breeds need to serve a certain function to go into a commercial operation, because if
Oh
you
God,
want to
we're
put
back
more,
to the commercial.
No, I'm not trying to go down there. I'm just maybe stating that it used to be okay. Our Angus cattle would marble well, our Hereford cattle were better range cattle, or Limousine would insert so much more muscle for you, that the commercial guy could, in general, go to a breed to get a genetic piece. And maybe we're losing that within the show ring. I'm not saying there aren't purebred breeders out there that are still focusing on those exact traits that breed was known for, very popular. But I think it emphasizes that there is more of a continued disconnect between the show ring and the commercial world. So agreeing with Ryan a little bit that's evidence in itself when we try to make them all look like one. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. And I think if we look at the average of the breeds, an Angus still kind of looks like an Angus, and a Hereford still looks like a Hereford. But those, what we call truly elite ones, I think we could peel those hides off and slap another hide on, and I don't think we'd miss a beat. I think they'd still win.
I'm the guy that at most shows I judge, I tell people that good ones and great ones come in all shapes, sizes, colors, and kinds. You just have to be able to identify what is elite about those animals, and etc. But I do agree with you that, like, those top end cattle, and I think you could say this for almost any species. If you made them all the same color, I think it would be increasingly hard to determine which one underneath that was actually a Hereford, an Angus, a Key, a Lemmy, and you go into the other breeds, in terms of pigs. If we just laid the same color on top of them, could you decipher which one was a Duroc versus a Hamp versus a crossbred, etc.?
No, that's an interesting concept. And I don't know how far back you'd have to go, but I could say very safely, if you went 20 years back, you could do that and still probably call most of the breeds. If you further back you go, the easier. But I don't know where it really drifted the furthest, but I'm very confident that if you go back to the year 2000 even, you could still do it in most of them without too much trouble. Mm-hmm. Go back further and it gets even easier yet, really easy. But no, this was good. I appreciate the dialogue in this one, because you and I don't see these things quite the same, which is perfectly fine. And I am, once again, I don't want anybody to forget that I am a hypocrite on these circus show goats, relative to me wanting to keep some practicality in the other species, and no justification for it other than it is what it is. We're going to move on to our question and answer. Now, I'd like to thank Pope Joy Livestock Transit for sponsoring this section. I recently put 20 prospect wethers into the care of Stephen Popejoy. Hauled them into Oklahoma and Texas for me. All arrived in great shape. Confirmation when each was delivered to me that, yep, we got this one off the trailer. Everything's good. Client's happy with how they came off the trailer. So there are plenty of options out there to haul your show stock. Choose wisely. Popejoy Livestock Transportation can be found on Facebook. I don't hesitate to recommend. And again, I get a little particular about those kind of things. So if at all possible, please look them up on Facebook. You can get routing information and pricing and so forth from Stephen at any time. But we do appreciate the sponsorship for the question and answer. With our first question, Jeremy Couples. Why are there so many people drenching lambs and goats with different types of drenches that they are all very secretive about? Does that make sense to you, Ryan?
That's you sheep and goat people. Y'all are all secretive about everything.
It does appear that everybody has their own unique drench that they don't want to cut loose, and they guard with their life, the ingredients. And it's amazing what some things are in these unique drenches.
I'm just going to tell y'all, if you come to the cattle barn, we are not like the sheep and goat people. And if you come up and ask us, I'm not saying that the sheep and goat people, you go up and ask them, they're not going to tell you. But we don't have it all disguised before you come in like they do. There are no labels. There is no nothing when you go into those barns there. It's all in some like Tupperware container that's already pre-mixed and all this other stuff. We like literally take the stuff out of the packet, mix it up right there in front of you, in front of the water, in the water bucket, in front of God and everybody. We don't do the Slim Shady nonsense there. So again, hats off to you sheep and goat people for like keeping that under lock and key. it's just a whole lot. Like, that's a whole lot of prep work beforehand. And again, as I said last week, I'm there to drink and win banners. I ain't got time for all that prep work beforehand. So that's my thoughts on it.
No, and that's accurate. And I want to reemphasize, and I have nothing wrong with using something that's going to pull water into the muscle a little quicker if we can put some glucose or make sure we've got the right properties there. Sometimes we get a little crazy and we really don't even know how these things are working biologically. And sometimes we're doing more damage than good. But I want to remind everyone, there's one thing that's going to legally change the muscle mass in a market lamb or a goat in that last 24 hours. And that's simply hydration. Water works really, really well. Doesn't upset their stomach, doesn't push their top up. If you're feeding them a little bit, the water's still going to be pulled in the muscle. You can use a lot of different things, and people have had a lot of success doing so. But remember, maybe it wasn't just that drench. Maybe it was the animal and the care it had prior to. So reel it in a little bit. Don't get too worried about what your neighbor's secret drench is, because if you've got a bucket of water, I can assure you, if you go to the American Royal this week and watch any of the families that I'm working with or our children, I'm pretty open that I'll grab the drench gun where we're allowed to drench and pull water right out of their water bucket. And that's what's going in those animals. I'm not saying you couldn't put some electrolytes in, some other things that may bring hydration in a little bit quicker. But as long as we're getting plenty of water in there in time, I think we're still going to reach what we call that maximum hydration. But I think an excellent, entertaining question, Jeremy. We appreciate it. The next one, I'm going to leave the name off, Ryan, because we won't hear both sides of this story. And I don't want to call out another individual without hearing both sides. So a question was presented. What is the proper way to handle a fitter or clipper screwing up your animal? I assume this must have happened to this person.
Wait, say that again.
The question is, and again, I'm not releasing the name. I don't even have the name there. I don't remember it, thankfully. What is the proper way to handle a fitter or clipper screwing up your animal? I have a really good answer for it.
By all means, I can't wait to hear this.
I think it's just very simple, and you can elaborate on it. I think you chose the fitter, or you chose the person to clip that animal. It's kind of on you.
Okay, see that
as the owner of the animal.
Miracles do happen, people. Dale and I absolutely, positively concur 1,000% on this right here.
I mean, it just seems simple. I don't know what else to do. You
hired said person and you're unhappy with the results. That's kind of on you.
It is. It's maybe disappointing to you that they didn't do the job that you had hoped they would. And if maybe they misled you, that's unfortunate. And I guess that the best resolve to that is you do not hire them again. That's my suggestion.
Well, you definitely don't hire them again. And then I guess the other thing is, if you aren't happy with the results, and then you need to try to find somebody else to come in and do some repair work on that job that they did clipping or fitting. Now, granted, depending on what species it is and, how bad the botch job is, only probably so much can be done, but definitely there can be somebody brought in there to help, fix it up a little bit. But again, this goes back to what we've said so many times. And I can't stress this enough. And this is in almost every area of competitive livestock showing. Research is your friend and research is the key.
Amen. I'm with you on there. The next question, and this is more of a request than a question, Ryan. And this is funny because it kind of works into our secret drench and keeping everything under lock and key. Because this one, even though she directs it to both of us, I'm going to put it right on your lap. Ashley Riley has more of a request than a question. Ryan, this is in your wheelhouse here. Mm-hmm. Ashley state, we were just listening to episode 26 about judging contest, and we're curious if you guys could feature a sample set of reasons for kids to hear.
I cannot.
I knew that answer was coming.
I cannot. For multiple reasons. First off, I'm pretty sure there's what do they call those privacy contracts that you have to sign and all this other stuff. I'm sure there's some kind of clause in those in terms of my reasons from back then. But again, and then I'm not going to get on here and give a sample set of reasons. I'm just not going to do that.
I would love to hear it. I would really enjoy it.
Right. Yeah, I know you would. I'm not going to do that. And then again, I think that if we picked someone to do that, that would probably be unfair, because I'm sure there are multiple talented individuals that would be very good at giving a sample set of reasons. I do know that almost every college that has a judging team either has a camp of some sort or has materials that I'm sure they would be willing to share. But, and so that is what I would suggest you do, and go for that. But yeah, as if Dale thinks that I'm going to give a sample set of reasons on Beyond the Ring, he's truly needs medication.
I did not think you would, but I thought we're going to throw it out there, and that maybe there's that chance. And I would be happy to, but I promise you,
I don't read these things, people, because I would have told him, no way in hell can he ask this on this podcast.
I knew that was coming. I would be happy to give a set, but guys, and I was very proud of where my reasons were in collegiate judging, but I can assure you that I'm listening to these kids now, and the progress that's been made, it's amazing. I mean, there's some really, really good ones out there, and Ryan and I would probably be putting a little bit of corner if we put a couple example sets up there. My daughter's a sophomore in college and has really progressed quite a bit here in the last 12 months. And it's shocking to me.
Extremely talented young lady.
How fast this progression is. And I mean, there's kids out there in junior, far more. There's sophomores in college right now talking like I never even thought senior college kids could. I mean, there's some flat good ones out there, guys. And maybe we'll grab 3 or 4. Maybe someday we could put something up there, Ryan, that just some sets that we found personally appealing. And I think you and I are probably pretty close on what we enjoy to hear in that side of things. But I love the question, partially because I thought it'd be great to put Ryan on the spot and knowing what his answer was going to be on that one.
Here's the whole thing. I give reasons almost every weekend at a show on multiple times in classes. And so anyway, again, and I want to bring this up because I took a little heat because there was a Facebook post that said that I quoted me from last week that said that I do not believe that collegiate livestock judging trains you to sort a show. I did say that. I'm going to stand by that, and I'm going to tell you why.
You tell us why, okay?
I'm going to. Because, again, there were some people on there that made some rather shitty, derogatory comments, and I do know who they were, and I will see them personally, and I will tell them why. But I'm going to tell them why on here, too. The reason that livestock judging does not train an individual to sort a show is this. Most of the kids that go through livestock judging, when they get off that team and they begin their judging career, they stick to the species that they were brought up with primarily, because not only is that what they have the most knowledge about, but that's what they enjoy the most. I know lots of sheep people that don't care to judge a cattle show in their life. Vice versa, and you can go through every species. Most people want to judge what they're comfortable with, what they've been brought up around, and what they know the best. They had a whole lot of knowledge and a whole lot of input and a whole lot of genetics environment in them before they ever went to college to be on a judging team. And I promise you, the way that they sort of show is probably more tilted to their background and their upbringing and what won for them and was successful for them than what they learned in those 2 or 1 years in a judging team. And that's the simple truth. But in no way, shape, form, or fashion was I derogatory about junior livestock judging competition. I think it's absolutely one of the best things that I ever did. I think it is great for any kid that wants to do it. And I do think you learn a vast array of knowledge, techniques, skills, and attributes. I will say again, I do not think it trains kids to sort a show.
Thank you. You made that very clear, didn't you?
I can be clearer. And trust me, I will find those people and make sure I am crystal clear.
I guess I was unaware of it, but it is entertaining listening to you about it. And I can see where people would challenge that, because I think you can argue whatever you want. I think obviously there's some things in terms of
I don't think this is a good time to try to argue this point with me, Dale.
I'm saying that you're going to broaden your term out. You can throw some things that are going to be valid, and just maturity and growing up, and college does more for you because it's taken, if you're going for a bachelor's, usually 4 years of your life. And guess what? In that 4 years of your life, you've done a lot of maturing. So you usually come out a little better shape than when you went in. I'm not sure that a lot of what you've obtained in coursework maybe you did it, but rather just maturity. We have one more question. Brian Seymour. I would like to hear your all's tips for giving show cattle shots and not make knots.
Ew. This is a terrible question. Man,
I can try to address to a certain degree.
It's a terrible question because people will figure out exactly a little bit more of my insanity. And I want to state from the beginning, yes, I can give shots. I have given shots hundreds of times. I will also tell you that if there is anyone else in the general vicinity that I trust to give the shot, I am going to have them do it. And the reason is why I believe without a doubt in my mind that all of those animals remember who is the one that gives those shots, and they don't like those people. And I do not want to be the person that the animal does not like. But
no, there's no question that that's happening.
See, people think that I'm nuts when I tell people that, and I promise you it's true.
No. I could go off for a very long time about that. Even tracking goats or lambs, the person that's putting them on that track, that does not need to be the showman. I know we want our youth to be involved in all of it, but in my mind, anything that could be constructed, giving a shot somewhat negative by that animal, you do not want that showman doing it. It doesn't necessarily work.
It's a miracle, people. Dale and I agreed twice in one episode. It's great.
We did. And this one's easy for me. I mean, that's just an automatic. You just don't. Okay. So given the shots, I think, and there's some very simple things, and maybe we don't even need to bring them up, but we probably don't need to use that syringe and needle that's been in the barn laying around for a month or two, or since last fall, or whatever. A lot of times what we're dealing with is a contaminated needle that we're causing an infection. Maybe we're giving a vaccine that knot that you're talking about is what we refer to as a granuloma. And that's just a gathering of the immune cells that eventually will go down. Sometimes it takes much longer in certain individuals, even up to 6 months in some of our goat in lamb vaccines. So there are a lot of things. There is one thing I want to bring out that I was unaware of, and maybe others are, and I had to acquire this through several years of dealing with it, a popular antibiotic called Draxxin in a goat. And I can only speak for this in a goat because I have not used it enough in the other species. But if we were to deposit any amount of that Draxxin in the actual dermal layer, I know we're not giving it in the dermal layer. Sometimes we'll give it subcutaneous. Sometimes we'll give it intramuscular. But if we happen to deposit any in the dermal layer as the needle's going through to get to the muscle or the subcutaneous area, we cause a reaction there that can cause up to about a golf ball size just hole eaten away because of this terrible reaction to Draxxin. So what we'll do is pull the Draxxin out with a specific needle, change that needle, put a dry needle on. So when we're going through the skin, there's no residue on that needle that's going to cause that reaction. Now we still have to bring the needle out, and there's still a chance, but it's lessening that chance. So I don't know if there's a absolute good answer, and I'm sure there's other people other than Ryan and I out there that can maybe answer that question better. Most of your veterinarians could probably do a much better job on it, but I think use some common sense and be practical. And anytime you have a chance to change the needle, and I, up until now, I'd never do it. I'd pull the medicament out of the bottle, and I'd use that same needle to jab into that animal. And sometimes we do get some reactions in the dermal layer, not that often, probably not in the other species, but it does happen. So that's all I have on that one.
My thoughts on it, especially in terms of cattle. And again, this can't happen it depends a lot on what you were giving that animal. And I guess this goes in all species. But one way, sure way to not get a knot is if you can mainline that antibiotic or whatever you're giving, then you're not going to get a knot. Now,
Absolutely agree with that.
It takes a lot more skill to be able to hit those veins and do that, but that's one way. And again, not all medications you can do that. Two, another tip is always do it on the offside, no matter what you're doing. If do it on the offside. Like Dale said, clean needles. The other thing that I would also tell a lot of people is, depending on what medication you're giving, the size and gauge of a needle can be just as important as where you're shooting that animal. And so if that medication can go through a smaller gauge needle efficiently and without any hiccups, then the less likely it is going to be that you will have a bruise or any type of knot on those animals. So those are the kind of little tips that I have.
No, exactly. And you know what? That stimulated me to think a little bit back towards my Animal Science 101 that I taught for many, many years. And you know what? There are a couple things I want to mention briefly. Some of these medicants, especially if we're going to a steer or a heavier weight animal, we have to give a fairly large volume, and we may require 2 different injection sites, so we're not depositing too much medicament in one area. And the other one, and Ryan was so good to always go to the offside. I mean, that just needs to be automatic for you, I hope, at this point, is the fact that a lot of times we get very guilty of things that should be refrigerated, maybe aren't. Sometimes maybe we'll leave them up on the dash of our truck and it's supposed to be in a refrigerator. Do that for one hot day and then we think, well, we'll be all right. We'll put it in the refrigerator and kind of forget about it. But any time that we handle these vaccines and or other medicants in a manner that they're not supposed to, we're causing damage, and we could cause some issues with exactly what you're talking about, not appearing because it's not absorbed properly because of the mishandling. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. Try to read the label. Again, don't assume everything needs to go in the refrigerator. More times than not, if it says room temperature, the refrigerator is probably okay, but I would read that label, and we don't do that enough on how we should store and take a little more caution with how we're handling these medicants and vaccines. But I think that wraps up our question and answer, Ryan. It's been a good discussion. We agreed on a few things, disagreed on a few things, but in general, I think good. Your phone survived. We may have had a couple little fades when you're talking there, but not bad considering the internet issue that we're dealing with in Crockett, Texas.
Oh, and before we get off here, I just want to wish everyone who is exhibiting at the American Royal this week and the next couple of weeks the very best of luck. I know that there are thousands of kids and open exhibitors that are really excited about going to this show, and we are extremely grateful to the American Royal for having this event. And once again, I implore all of you to be grateful, to be appreciative, seek out those people, thank them for having this event, and also follow the damn rules. If they tell you to wear a mask, wear a mask.
And they've already told you it is in black and white on the website. They're pushing it pretty hard right now, so please do so. Thank you to Glenn Allen and all the staff out there that are making this happen this week. I can't tell you how appreciative I am and the Stock Show families that are heading that direction right now. Until next week, be safe.
Y'all come back now. You hear?